Emile Warre was a French priest and beekeeper, and his intention was to create a beehive that, as far as possible, recreated the natural conditions that the bees lived in the wild, but remaining practical for the beekeeper. It was also designed to be built economically by anybody with simple tools. And he looked at all of the hives and features that were available at the time and came up with what he called the People's Hive. The hive is a series of identical boxes stacked on top of each other, and the boxes have bars in them rather than frames. It also has a quilt insulation. And his philosophy on beekeeping and the People's Hive, plans for it, were in his book Beekeeping for All. Now, these plans have been translated into English, and people have made some amendments to them. And I'm going to do a series of videos on the process I'm going to go through to build one of these hives. This will be the first video on how I'm going to make a Warre hive. Inevitably there's going to be a fair amount of woodworking as part of these videos, but we'll concentrate on the sort of specifically bee type of stuff, and probably once it's all been finished I'll do a comparison between a Warre hive and a national hive. First up is the wood that I'm going to use. Beehives are often made out of cedar because it's very weather resistant, waterproof. I can't afford that, so I bought some fairly cheap wood from Wicks, which is it's quite shiny, which is not a great thing, as the bees want to be able to lay down propolis and waxing on the inside, so I'll go over all of this with a wire brush eventually. And also, the dimensions of the Warre hive mean getting pieces of wood which is about this big. These are conveniently just slightly bigger than half the height that I need, which means that I'm going to have to joint two pieces together to get the walls and the front and the back sorted out. So I need to cut a lot of these things. I'm probably going to make 3 boxes initially. I have no bees to put in it, so there's no particular hurry. It's more of a winter project than anything else. So I need to cut a lot of these things into sections, and what I'm going to use is my mitre saw, and what I've got here is a little jig thing that I've made, which means I can cut a number of things quite quickly of the same length. This thing here is a block that's movable up and down, and what I've done is I measure 300, which is what some of the walls need to be, and I can just cut a lot of them to the same size every time. Put the wood up against the block here. They're all the same length, so this makes life a little bit easier. So I've got a lot of these to do, and I'll get back to you when I've done them. Now that the planks have been cut to length, they need to be stuck together. And this bit and the next couple of bits are going to be a bit more about woodworking than anything else, although some of the things that I'll do are relevant to the bees, so where we do bee relating stuff we'll spend a bit of detail on that. But as far as joining these two pieces of wood together to get the right height, what I use is something called a biscuit jointer, which is this rather fearsome looking thing, and it has a cutting blade that comes out the front, it cuts grooves in both pieces of wood that you want to join together, and then you put a thing called a biscuit between the two and then glue it all together. So I'll just show you quickly how this works. So if you'd like to put on your safety glasses and ear defenders, we'll get started. And what you do first off, when you get that out of the way, is you make a couple of marks on both pieces of wood where the biscuits are going to be put. Okay, so then use this thing, line it up, and groove, move along to the other one. So now it's been cut, you can see the grooves that are in there. Just clear out the sawdust that's in there. This biscuit cutter thing is a bit of a beast, but I use it a lot for making the nuke boxes where I'm joining bits of old pallet wood together, so it's quite a neat way of doing it. So you have two pieces of wood with the slots in them. Next up is the glue, and come on, and make sure it goes into the actual groove that's been cut as well as the surface. And the other one. Next thing is the biscuits. These are these things. That's little bits of wood, birch I think they're supposed to be, different sizes you can get, and they just slot in there and they go in halfway. Then you line them up again, use the pencil marks, push it in, and there you go. So quite an easy process. What I need to do is just wipe off the glue that's squeezed out, and then they need to be clamped to stick them together. And I've got another one that I made earlier in my Blue Peter voice, and what I'll do is I'll clamp both of them together. So using these things, now these aren't very wide pieces of wood and they shouldn't bow as they're tightened, but just to make sure that they don't, I'll just put some side clamps on here. Get to them. Come on. And the other side. So there we go. So that's pretty much done now. We just need to do all the others. And then once they've all been jointed together, we could start putting the sides together to make the box, but there are various things that need to be done after this which are easier to do when the pieces of wood are not sort of screwed into each other. So that'll be the next point. So I'll see you in a minute. In a conventional sort of hive, you have these enclosed wooden frames, and there's wax foundation in there which the beekeeper puts in. With the Warre Hive and the top bar hive, what you do instead is just have wooden strips laying across, and the bees then will build their comb for it. Now, to do that, you'll need to cut little rebates in the side of the wall here, so that the bars, which look a little like that, will sit on there. So to cut a rebate here, the best thing to use is this thing, which is a router, and set this up. Now the drill bit isn't actually wide enough to cut the size groove that I want, so there's a little lip across here which can be snapped off. And I'll sand that to tidy it up a little bit. But then the idea then is that the bar will sit on the side of the wall like that. And those are the rebates cut. Next up is the handles. The next little job is just to make some handles for the hive, and they're just simple little strips of wood. And I suspect Warre would have nailed these to the side of the hive. And obviously we can use screws to do it as well, but I think just to add a little bit of extra strength to it, I'm going to use carriage bolts, which are bolts with a little square neck to them, and you whack them in, and that square neck stops the bolt from moving, which means you can tighten things up fairly easily. So I've drilled some holes in the side of the hive to take these things, so just slide them in. And push them through. Okay, so that's in fairly tight. On the other side, what I've done is to drill out a little sort of like area around the screw, so that when I put the nuts on, they will go beneath the surface of the wall. It doesn't matter particularly, but hey ho. So on goes a washer and a nut. Oops. Tighten it up. Okay, that's pretty solid. This is the inside to the hive, so obviously these things we don't want sticking out. So what we'll do is we'll use an angle grinder to cut them off, which I quite like using because it's like having your own little firework display. So that's okay. Probably see sort of there's nothing sticking out the sides here. So that's done, and I've got another 4 or 5 to do, and then we'll get on to the next bit, which is making the windows for the hive, which will be by far and away the worst thing I've got to do. So see you in a minute. There are 2 parts to the observation window. There's the actual window itself, which will have a glass, a perspex rather, window in it, and then on top of the window goes a door. And so the first thing is just to cut out the piece of wood you need for the door, and then use that as a template for the window, which should be a little bit smaller. You then need to cut out the window, and the way I've done it is just to drill rather some holes in each corner of the window, and then use the jigsaw to cut that out. So once that's been done, the next thing is the rebate needs to be cut around the window for the perspex to sit in, and this is how I did it. Okay, the backs now have been cut out with a window there, and on the inside what we need to do is cut a rebate around the outside of the window so that I can put a bit of acrylic in there. So I use the router table. It's got a little bit there which is for cutting little rebates into things. So here we go. So now it's got the little rebate in, I don't know if you can see that, sideways on perhaps. And what I'll do now is to cut a piece of perspex, and that will fit in there, and it'll go flush. Okay, next thing, bits of perspex. The windows are cut from a piece of acrylic, and I sanded them down a little bit just to get them to fit inside the rebate, and they're screwed into the rebates using some small screws. So finally I get round to putting it all together. Now Warre would have used nails, and obviously I could use screws, but to try and make the sort of hardware as invisible as possible, I'm going to use things called pocket screws, which are little holes which you drill on the inside, and you use special screws to hold everything together, and it's all on the inside of the hive, so you can't see anything on the outside. And this is how I do them. All of the bits and pieces have been made now, it just needs to be put together. We have two, somewhere, yes. These are the sides with the handles on, so you can lift the hive up. This is the front of the hive, and it has the rebate across here so that the bars can be supported. And this is the back of the hive. Again, it's got the rebate across there, and it's also got a perspex window there so you can see what's going on. And in front of the window will go this thing, like a little door, just a bit of wood there to make a tag, and that will open up, and that just keeps it closed. So start putting this together. These holes that are in here are called pocket holes, and you use special screws to screw them in. The screws have got a square indent in the top rather than the cross or the flat blade like most screws have, so you need a special drill bit rather, to drill them in. So making sure we get them the right way around. Goes in there. Too bad. Around. Too bad. Now the back goes on. This gets a bit fiddly, so you won't be able to see what's going on, but I just need to screw the holes into the sides again. Move that around. So there we are, one box ready to go. Sorry I forgot, I need to screw this thing on as well, obviously. So the screws go in from the underside. That's it, finally. So there we are. The box just be the front of it. The handles for lifting it up seems quite steady. And at the back here, undo that. You can see what's going on, and then close it up again. So another couple of these to make, and then the next video is going to be about the floor that the hive is going to sit on.